Hello, Hood River. It's good to see all of you here this evening. I appreciate your attendance here. Let's hear it for everyone who showed up today. Thank you. Thank you.
Washington, just across the river. We're here.
Yeah, Washington. I know we have. Well, and I want to thank everyone who's here from Washington because you did a great job in helping to turn out a lot of support for us in that state. And here in Oregon, the election achieves a great significance because while Iowa and New Hampshire helped to determine the direction of the nomination, and that direction, as the person who introduced me said, you know, it's been pretty much assured. But Oregon, since it's at the end of that process, is going to help determine the direction of the Democratic Party. And that direction is going to be a direction of peace and health care for all and fair trade and civil liberties. And we are going to help put some backbone in the Democratic Party so that when the Democratic Party faces off in November, there'll be a real chance to win because people will be able to tell the difference. And so my candidacy, you know, goes forward fully understanding that Senator Kerry has a requisite number of votes for the nomination. I mean, I can count, okay? But I can also figure. And what I figure is that our party is lacking a direction at this moment. You know, you're on a platform committee. You know exactly what I mean. But think of what happens when the people of Oregon respond powerfully to a message of peace, where the people of Oregon are in a position to become the conscience of America, where you can actually help redirect this country's policies. Because since you're so close to the end of this nominating season, there's going to be a lot of attention focused on this state and its vote. And this is a moment when we need such a critical examination of where political parties stand on issues, and where Americans really are wanting a clear choice. I don't believe the American people want to, for example, exchange a Republican version of the war in Iraq for a Democratic version of the same. I think and yet just listen to the reportage and the news analysis and the talk shows of the last few days as the violence has continued to cycle in Iraq. You have leading Democrats coming forward and saying, well, you know, we can't cut and run, we have to stay the course. And you have leading Republicans saying, well, we can't cut and run, we have to stay the course. You have leading Democrats saying we're going to be there for years. You have leading Republicans saying we're going to be there for years. There's no talk about the imperative for peace. There's no talk about stepping back from this conflict. There's only talk about going forward, you know, into the breach, which means more war, more death, more total denial of a domestic agenda here. What's happening is that we're being dragged into this whirlpool of war, and that except for you, there may not be an opportunity in this country to really powerfully express the desires of people to go in a new direction. Look at where we're at. We're right back to the point of bring them on. We're going to get them. We'll show them. This is where we are again. And where does that lead? Where does it lead to put the men and women who represent this country bravely in a position where they are facing an uprising? 4 months ago, the leader of the Shiite Muslims said publicly that the United States must support free and fair elections in Iraq or face the possibility that a religious decree would be made, a fatwa, and that an uprising of all Shiite Muslims against the Americans would occur. Now let me tell you what this means. 60% of the population of Iraq is Shiite Muslims, 15 million people. Now, our troops have encountered thousands of them who were called forward by one cleric. If the leader of the Shiite Muslims, the Ayatollah Sistani, out of desperation for being ignored by the United States, calls forth an uprising across the country, one does not have to imagine the consequences. We have 130,000 troops there. There are millions of Iraqis. And the animosity is growing. The desperation is growing. The death toll is mounting on both sides. Washington, which showed a penchant for beating the drums for war and then leaping into this war without thinking about the consequences down the road, is now in this language of, you know, we can't cut and run, we have to stay the course, our national pride and honor is at stake. But no one's talking about the real cost of this war. Close to $200 billion and counting, 610 American lives, over 10,000 Iraqi lives, thousands of injuries on both sides. That money that's being spent on war is being spent while our domestic agenda of veterans affairs, housing, health care, education, job creation goes down. We don't have any money for those things, we're told, but we have money for tax cuts for the wealthy, we have money for war, we have money for military buildup. The country's going in a direction that's very dangerous right now. And we're at a point of deepening our involvement in Iraq. So I guess you could say I'm here to strike a cautionary note about what happens if we keep going deeper. If we keep going deeper, it's inevitable that there'll be a draft. It's just inevitable. Look, they're extending the terms of people in the service right now. 40% of the individuals who serve in the armed services today are either National Guardsmen or women or reservists. Some people are being sent back on a second tour of duty. There's war that is breaking out in other areas that requires or has caused U.S. involvement. And as this war gets deeper, there's just no question that the United States will be at a point of decision by next year, if not sooner, to call forth the draft. They won't call it an election year. But you know, 6 months ago, the Selective Service System put up a website which called for people to help staff local draft boards. There was a sudden hue and cry. They took it down the next day. But there's no money in the budget for helping to build the activities of Selective Service. People ask, well, what can we do? We're stuck. Well, no, we're not stuck. We can take a new direction. And that's the direction I want to talk to you about this evening. We know how we got involved in this. You know, in addition to the lies and misrepresentations, the UN process of inspections was swept aside. Think how much better we would have been if we would have used the UN inspectors. They could have found out what, you know, in a sense they already knew, what 130,000 troops found out later after an invasion, and that is that there were no weapons of mass destruction, if we'd have only followed the UN process. This attempt to beat up the UN or to try to make it look like it's nothing or a barrier to peace, I mean, talk about upside down, where the UN becomes the barrier to peace now, actually is an attempt by some Washington policymakers to insist that America alone has the right to determine the policy direction in the Persian Gulf, in the Middle East, and anywhere else in the world. It's a plan for an American imperium, a type of hegemony which is inconsistent with the 21st century. Because the century that we're in right now is not about nation against nation. It is non-state actors who are challenging nations for whatever reason. And so we're dealing with old thinking that is being brought into this time and space, which is impelling us towards war. and which is making it impossible for us to be able to shake this demon of war. And yet there is a path out, and here's the path. Understanding that we got into trouble when we rejected the world community's participation, we need to go back to the world community through the UN and ask the UN to handle the oil assets of Iraq on behalf of the Iraqi people until the Iraqi people are self-governing, to hold those assets in trust. There'll be people who say, well, you know, the UN couldn't handle the oil for food program. Look, the United Nations is the one institution that exists internationally for the purposes of creating peace through nonviolence. It was created specifically in its charter to end the scourge of war for all time. And yet it has been systematically picked apart and set aside for ideological reasons by this administration. And we're all paying a price for it right now. We need to go to the UN, ask the UN to handle the oil assets on an interim basis. We also need to ask the UN to handle the contracts. So there's no more Halliburton sweetheart deals, no more corrupt dealing with the contracts. On September 19th, the United States, through Paul Bremer, set forth a decree that said that we were going to privatize the top 200 economic activities in the Iraq economy. That being a violation of both the Geneva and the Hague Convention. The Geneva and the Hague Conventions were written so as to stop the theft of the wealth of a nation that was being attacked and occupied. Otherwise, war never ends. Otherwise, people were always trying to get back that which, had been stolen from them. So we need to renounce this privatization scheme. We need to go and let the whole world community know that we're putting aside these base ambitions to try to covet the wealth or appropriate the wealth of the people of Iraq. We then need to ask the UN to help handle the development of a constitution in Iraq. Most Americans don't realize this. The constitution that we're peddling in Iraq contains a provision where the Iraqi people give to the United States the ability to maintain a military presence.
You're kidding.
No, I'm not kidding. In addition to that, this talk about a handover of power on June the 30th that you hear talked about everywhere,
Oh, yeah.
it's a handover of power from the United States-controlled Coalition Provisional Authority to the United States-controlled Iraqi government. So it's switching the power from the left hand to the right hand, okay? It's not about removing the troops. It's not about removing the troops, and it's certainly not about democracy. It's about moving the power from the left hand to the right hand. They're not fooling anyone in Iraq. Least of all, the clerical leaders. But they are fooling a lot of American people who think that somehow on June the 30th, the troops are going to start coming home. Not a chance. Not with this direction. But we need to ask the UN to help develop a constitution for Iraq, which does not involve a permanent presence of the United States in that country. The other thing we need to ask the UN to do is to help develop free and fair elections. Now, the Grand Ayatollah Sistani, 4 months ago, was telling the U.S. he was demanding that. He wasn't asking for setting up a theocracy. He was saying we want free and fair elections. What he didn't understand is that this administration wasn't particularly familiar with free and fair elections. But we better become familiar with it because the Iraqi people are demanding self-determination. Now, they may not pick the kind of government that would be congenial to the designs of this particular administration or even another American administration. But the right to self-determination is part of what is going to be needed to help stabilize Iraq. The way things are going right now, we may have blundered into setting the stage for a civil war in Iraq. It is, the longer we stay there, the more of a mess we're creating. But we need to go and get the world community involved. So when we set aside ambitions for oil, for contracts, for privatizing Iraq, for trying to control Iraq, running it by remote control, trying to secure a military presence in there permanently, we then reach out to the world community and get the world community to understand that America is taking a new direction, setting aside ambitions towards unilateralism and preemption. It's a whole new approach. We're actually talking about a new approach. Now, what is this the beginning of? If the United States takes that approach, it means that we are making a beginning towards creating a sustainable structure of international law. Now, what does that look like? It looks like a new approach in Iraq, where we're letting go of these base ambitions, and a new approach in the world, where we set aside unilateralism, preemption, and nuclear first strike doctrines, and then we reach out to the world community. And this is the place we're in, where we reach out to the world community and say that this is the moment the United States wishes to participate in affirming a sustainable structure of international law through not only taking a new direction in Iraq, but through affirming the tenets of the Non-Proliferation Treaty and once again committing to leading the way to the abolition of all nuclear weapons. It's time that we took this position. And our country, in order to help create and affirm a structure of international law, we should be taking a stand on behalf of affirming the principles of the Biological Weapons Convention, the Chemical Weapons Convention, the Small Arms Treaty, the Landmine Treaty. We should be joining the International Criminal Court and signing the Kyoto Climate Change Treaty. It's time for the United States to rejoin the world. This is about a new approach where we come into harmony with the world community. Because it's only by coming into harmony that we can hope to achieve any kind of peace in our society. Right now, we're taking a different direction. The direction is we're separating ourselves from the world community. And that kind of isolation only can lead to more war. That's not the direction the world is going in. I mean, whether it's changes in transportation, in communication, in trade, in the web, the advancing tide in this world is towards human unity. It's actually towards achieving a kind of harmony among all people. And yet, our country at this moment is moving in a direction that's counter to that. We understand this intuitively. We understand this with the unease we feel about the direction this country's taking, and we see it in so many ways. We understand in the way that in the last couple of years, any and all of us, how many people here have had the feeling in the last few years, I can't, or had the thought, I can't believe what's happening to this country? Yeah. Some people raising two hands, okay. So, we all feel that. Well, let me tell you, that's a feeling people have shared all over the world. Because they sense that there's ways in which people are trying to come together. Our destiny is not chaos and disintegration or the destiny of a conqueror. I believe our destiny has been and always will be to be the shining city on the hill, to be a nation which can help people reach their practical aspirations for peace, for economic and social security, which can help open the path towards sustainability, which is reflected in peace, sustainability which is reflected in reconciliation with our natural environment. Thomas Berry, the philosopher and writer, in his book called The Great Work, talked about how important it is that we achieve a reconciliation with nature. That reconciliation, or harmony with nature, is a path towards peace. It's a path which all of you understand. because your presence here in this region speaks to an attunement with those principles, a resonance with this sense of tranquility which comes from connection to the natural environment. We know why we're in Iraq. In a word, and we know also, that if we move towards sustainability, away from reliance on oil and coal and nuclear, and towards a natural connection with the environment in harnessing the power of the sun, solar, wind, biomass, green hydrogen, all of those. And you know what it is? It's coming into a natural rhythm with nature. That's where the wealth is. That's where the commonwealth is. That's where we save the world, protect this common global environment, and lead toward peace. It's all together. What I'm speaking of is a world vision, of a world as one, of a world which is interdependent and interconnected, of a world where each one of us has the ability to make choices that can favorably impact the world, of a world where peace, not war, is inevitable, of a world where the power of the human heart dwarfs the power of armaments, of a world where the human spirit soars and creates new possibilities instead of being mired and chained in war. We have such capacities for transformation. It's about time that we expect our government to come into alignment with our hopes and dreams. It's about time that we have confidence in the power of our own aspirations